The sun bled red across the Arizona sky like an open wound. Gunshots cracked through the dry air, sharp, merciless, echoing off the red rock walls. Clara Hayes leaned low over the exhausted horse, one arm wrapped tight around the small body of 12-year-old Tommy Reed, pressed against her chest. The boy's thin fingers clutched her torn dress like it was the only thing still holding him to this world. Behind them, 3 riders thundered through the dust, Victor Kane's men. Their horses kicked up clouds of red sand that burned the eyes and choked the throat. "Faster, girl." "Faster," Clara whispered desperately to the mare, but she could feel the animal's strength failing beneath them. Each breath the horse took came shorter, more ragged. Another gunshot ripped past her ear. She flinched. Tommy whimpered but didn't cry out. He was trying so hard to be brave. Clara's heart hammered so violently she could barely think. Her hands, raw and bleeding from the reins, shook as she reached for the old revolver at her hip. Only 3 bullets left. 3 bullets for 3 killers. She twisted in the saddle arm, burning, and fired. The first shot went wide. The second hit one of the riders square in the shoulder. The man screamed and slumped sideways, but didn't fall. Clara's breath caught. "Hold on, Tommy," she gasped, voice cracking. "Just hold on." The third bullet was meant for the leader, the biggest, meanest of Kane's dogs. She aimed carefully this time, eyes narrowed against the stinging dust. Click. Empty. The hammer fell on nothing but air. At that exact moment, the horse's front leg buckled as it hit a loose patch of scree near the edge of a steep ravine. The world tilted violently. Clara felt the sickening lurch of free fall. For one terrifying heartbeat, everything slowed. She saw the red sky spinning above her. She felt Tommy's small arms tighten around her waist in pure terror. She heard the horse's frantic scream as it tumbled beside them. In that frozen moment, a single thought burned through Clara's mind like fire. They said, "I killed my husband." They said I was poison. But today, they're going to murder the only child I have left in this godforsaken world. The ground rushed up to meet them. Red dust exploded upward in a choking cloud as horsewoman and boy plunged over the edge of the ravine and disappeared into the jagged darkness below. Silence fell over the desert. Only the wind remained whispering across the blood-red sand like it was already mourning the dead. And somewhere in that silence, a quiet but fierce promise took root in Clara Hayes' broken heart. If she somehow survived this fall, she would never run again. She would make Victor Kane answer for every lie, every bullet, every stolen life. Because when the law itself becomes the wolf, the only choice left is to become something even more dangerous. This is a story about what happens when good people are pushed too far, and how even the smallest spark of courage can set an entire desert on fire. The wind howled low across the red rocks, carrying the faint echo of distant gunshots that had long since fallen silent. Jack Harlan stood motionless on the ridge, his battered hat pulled low against the dying light. 3 years of hiding in these forsaken canyons had taught him one thing above all else. Silence usually meant death. He heard the scrape of hooves first, then nothing. When he climbed down the narrow trail, he found them. A woman and a boy, broken and still among the sharp stones at the bottom of the ravine. The horse lay a few feet away, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood darkened the red dust beneath them. Jack knelt slowly. His calloused hands moved with surprising gentleness as he checked for signs of life. The woman's pulse was weak, but there. The boy's breathing was shallow fever, already burning through his small frame. Without a word, Jack lifted the boy first, then the woman, carrying them one by one up the steep path to his hidden stone shelter, tucked deep inside the canyon wall. He laid them on the narrow cot covered with old blankets. The fire in the corner crackled softly as he worked, cleaning wounds, wrapping torn flesh with strips of clean cloth, forcing water between cracked lips. He asked no questions. He expected no thanks. Hours slipped by. Clara Hayes woke to the taste of blood and dust in her mouth. Pain flared through her ribs with every breath. Her eyes fluttered open to the dim glow of a single lantern and the shadow of a tall, broad-shouldered man moving near the fire. Fear slammed into her chest like a fresh bullet. She tried to sit up, but the room spun. Her hand instinctively reached for the revolver that was no longer at her hip. Jack turned slowly. His face was weathered eyes, the color of winter sky. Calm, distant, unreadable. Clara's voice came out hoarse and trembling. Who are you? Did Kane send you? She pushed herself backward until her back hit the cold stone wall. Her arms instinctively searched for Tommy. The boy lay beside her, cheeks flushed with fever, breathing too fast. Jack said nothing at first. He simply reached for the revolver lying on the rough wooden table, checked the cylinder, and walked toward her. Clara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. He stopped 2 feet away and held the loaded gun out to her grip first. "If you think I'm one of Kane's men," he said quietly, his voice rough from long silence, "then shoot me now. But that boy needs his mother to stay alive." Clara stared at the gun. Her fingers shook as she took it. The weight felt familiar and terrifying. She didn't shoot. Instead, tears she had been holding back for days finally broke free, sliding silently down her dirt-streaked face. The nights that followed were long and fevered. Tommy's small body burned with infection. Clara stayed awake for hours, wiping his forehead with cool cloths, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "Stay with me, Tommy. Please stay with me." Jack moved like a ghost around the shelter, boiling water, brewing bitter herbs, never pushing, never demanding answers. But he was always there when the boy cried out in pain. On the third night, as the desert wind moaned outside, Clara finally spoke. "My husband, Thomas. He didn't deserve what they did to him." Her voice cracked. "Victor Kane wanted our land. When Thomas refused to sell, they shot him in the back and blamed me. The whole town turned against me. They called me a murderer." She looked down at Tommy, who slept fitfully beside her. "I took this boy in after his parents died of the fever. He's all I have left. And they still want to take him from me, too." Jack sat across from her, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire. For a long moment he didn't speak. When he did, his words were low and heavy. "I once wore a badge. Texas Ranger. Lost my best friend the same way. Hanged for a crime he didn't commit because the powerful men didn't like how honest he was." His eyes met hers for the first time, not warm but steady. "I came out here to forget. Looks like the world won't let me." Something shifted in the small stone shelter that night. It wasn't trust yet, not fully. But it was the beginning of something fragile and warm, like the first small flame fighting against the cold desert darkness. Clara no longer reached for the gun when Jack moved close. Tommy, even in his fever, began to relax when he heard the quiet sound of Jack chopping wood outside. And Jack Harlan, the man who had sworn never to care again, found himself listening for their breathing long after the fire had burned low. This is a story about how trust can grow in the harshest places, and how 3 broken souls might just find the strength to heal each other when the whole world wants them dead. The first pale light of dawn painted the canyon walls in soft blood red. Jack Harlan stood at the narrow entrance of the stone shelter listening. The desert had gone quiet again. Too quiet. Then came the sound of a single horse approaching slowly. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, just as Marshal Elias Crow rode into view. The marshal's face was lined with dust and years of hard choices. His eyes met Jack's with the weight of old friendship and new trouble. "Jack Elias," said, voice low. "I came alone, but trouble's coming behind me." Inside the shelter, Clara sat up slowly, still weak, her arm protectively around Tommy, who slept fitfully beside her. She heard the voices, and her body tensed at once. Elias dismounted and walked closer, boots crunching on the dry ground. "Victor Kane's put $500 on her head," he said without wasting words. "Alive. He's calling her a husband killer and a danger to the whole territory. He's gathering more men. Bigger posse. They'll be sweeping this desert by tomorrow night." Clara's breath caught sharply. She pulled Tommy closer, her fingers trembling against his small shoulder. The boy's stirred eyes fluttering open, still glassy with fever. Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing at first. He only looked at Clara, then at the frightened boy. Tommy, even in his weakened state, had been listening. When the adult stepped outside to speak privately, the boy quietly slipped from the cot. His small hand reached for Jack's spare revolver resting on the table. It was heavy, almost too heavy for him, but he gripped it with both hands. When Jack and Elias returned, Tommy stood in the middle of the shelter, legs shaking, but eyes burning with determination. "I won't let them take her," he said, voice cracking but fierce. "She's my ma now. I'll protect Mama Clara, even if I have to shoot." Clara's heart broke and swelled at the same time. She knelt quickly, gently taking the gun from his small hands. "Tommy." "No," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You're just a boy." But the look on Tommy's face told her he had already decided. In his young heart, Clara was the only mother he had left, and he would die before losing her too. Jack watched the scene in silence. Something deep inside him shifted. A door he had kept locked for 3 long years began to creak open. That afternoon, Jack made his choice. "We can't stay here," he said quietly to Clara while packing supplies. "The deadlands are harsher, but they're harder to track. We go deeper." Today, as they prepared to leave, Jack spoke again, his voice rough with memory. "I left the Rangers because I watched my best friend hang from a rope for a crime he didn't commit. The same powerful men who wanted his land made sure the law looked the other way. I swore I'd never wear a badge again, never get involved." He looked at Clara, then at Tommy, who was trying bravely to carry a small pack. "But I'm done running from what's right." They moved out under the burning sun, heading further into the unforgiving desert. The tension grew with every mile. Late in the day, as they rested in the shadow of a tall rock formation, Jack spotted them fresh hoof prints in the soft sand near their old path. Not one horse, several. And they were circling close to where the shelter had been. Kane's men had already reached the canyon. Clara saw the tracks too. Her face paled. She instinctively pulled Tommy behind her, her hand resting on the revolver at her side. Jack's eyes darkened with quiet anger. That night, after they made a small, hidden camp, Jack climbed alone to the top of a rocky hill. The wind tugged at his coat as he stared toward the distant lights of Dust Hollow, barely visible on the horizon. He stood there for a long time, fists clenched at his sides. Then, in a voice low but steady, carrying only as far as the desert wind would take it, he whispered, "This time, I won't let justice be buried in the sand." The red dust swirled around his boots as the stars came out above the Arizona desert, cold, silent, and waiting. This is a story about how even the deepest scars can become the fuel for courage. and how one man's decision to stand up can give hope to those who thought the world had forgotten them. The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil as Jack led them deeper into the twisting red canyons. No trails marked this place. Only those who had once bled on these rocks knew the hidden paths. Jack moved with quiet certainty, his eyes scanning every shadow. Clara followed close behind, one hand resting protectively on Tommy's shoulder. The boy walked in silence, still weak, but determined not to slow them down. After hours of hard travel, the narrow passage opened into a small, forgotten box canyon. There, half hidden among the boulders, stood a crumbling stone shack and an old man sitting beside a dry well. Old man Silas looked up slowly. His face was cracked like the desert floor itself, deep lines carved by 10 years of loneliness and regret. His eyes narrowed at the sight of strangers. Jack raised a hand in peace. "We're not here to take anything, Silas. Just need shelter for a night. Maybe 2. Silas studied them for a long moment, then nodded once. "Water's almost gone. But the spring still trickles if you know where to dig." That evening, while the heat began to fade, Clara and Tommy worked beside the old miner, clearing sand and stones from the collapsed well. Tommy's small hands moved carefully, passing rocks to Clara. For the first time in days, the boy looked almost hopeful. Silas watched them quietly. Then, without warning, he reached into his worn coat and pulled out a small, battered notebook bound in cracked leather. "Been carrying this for 10 years, he said, voice rough as gravel. "Names, dates, how much blood Victor Kane spilled to steal what wasn't his." He opened the book with trembling fingers and pointed to a faded entry. "Including the night they shot your husband, ma'am. I saw it. I was there, hiding like a coward behind the rocks." Clara froze. Her hand stopped moving. The world seemed to tilt. You saw Thomas die," she whispered. Silas looked down, shame heavy in his eyes. "I was scared. Kane's men would have killed me too. So I ran. And I kept quiet." The notebook slipped from Tommy's hands as he tried to pass it to Clara. It fell open in the dirt. Clara stared at the pages. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Silas had been a witness all along. Anger surged through her chest, hot, blinding. She stood up suddenly, fists clenched at her sides. "You could have saved him," she said, voice shaking. "You could have spoken up, and none of this would have happened." Tears burned in her eyes. Silas said nothing. He only bowed his head, shoulders trembling with the weight of 10 silent years. Jack had been gone for nearly an hour. He had slipped away when he heard distant riders approaching the mouth of the canyon. Alone, he moved like smoke through the rocks until he faced a small group of pursuers led by Deputy Rafe Colton, a hard-eyed man loyal to Kane down to his bones. Jack didn't draw his gun to kill. Instead, he used the land itself. He scattered false tracks, overturned stones to suggest a fatal fall, and left a torn piece of Clara's blood-stained shawl caught on a cactus. When Colton and his men searched the area, they found what looked like the end of a desperate escape. Dead Colton finally growled. "No one survives that drop. Tell Kane the woman and the boy are finished." Jack watched them ride away from his hiding place, his face grim, but satisfied. When he returned to the canyon, as the stars began to appear, the fire was small and low. Clara sat apart from the others, arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the flames. The anger had cooled into something heavier, a painful mix of rage and reluctant understanding. Jack sat down beside her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "I once left a good man to die because I was afraid of the same power that's chasing us now. My best friend. I could have stood with him, Instead, I walked away. I've carried that shame every day since." He looked at her directly, his voice steady but raw. "I won't make that mistake again, Clara. Not with you. Not with the boy." Clara turned to him. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her eyes held something new, not just fear or pain, but the first fragile spark of real trust. Silas sat on the other side of the fire, silent and ashamed, yet still alive, with a chance to finally do what was right. Tommy leaned against Clara's side, his small hand finding hers. Around that flickering fire, the four of them sat together, a broken woman, a guilt-haunted ranger, an old man seeking redemption, and a brave boy who refused to let fear win. Jack spoke the words they had all been waiting to hear. Tomorrow, we stop running. We go back to Dust Hollow, not to hide, to face them. The desert night grew still around them, as if the land itself was listening and waiting for what came next. This is a story about how courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward even when every scar tells you to run. The desert wind carried the scent of creosote and distant rain as four shadowed figures slipped into Dust Hollow under cover of night. Clara Hayes walked with quiet purpose beside Jack Harlan. Tommy stayed close to her side, his small hand occasionally brushing hers for reassurance. Old man Silas moved slower, the weight of the leather notebook heavy in his coat and heavier still in his heart. Marshal Elias Crow met them at the edge of Town Lantern Low. His face was tight with conflict, but Clara had shown him the notebook the night before. The truth had shaken him to his core. Tomorrow morning, Elias whispered Kane plans to hold a mock trial in the square. He'll declare you guilty in absentia and take your land for good. We have one chance to stop it. They spent the long night planning in a hidden back room. No one slept much. Clara's hands trembled as she touched the notebook again and again. Jack remained steady, though his eyes carried the memory of friends he had failed before. Tommy clutched a small pocket knife, determined to protect his new family no matter the cost. Dawn broke with a blood-red sky. By mid-morning, the entire town had gathered in the central square under the harsh glare of oil lamps and swirling red dust. Victor Kane stood on a raised platform dressed in fine black cloth, smiling like a man who already owned the future. His hired guns flanked him, hands resting near their revolvers. The crowd murmured nervously. Many had once known Clara. Many had turned their backs on her out of fear. Kane raised his hands for silence. "Today we deliver justice for the murder of Thomas Hayes," he announced, voice smooth and commanding. "The fugitive Clara Hayes stands condemned. That's a lie." Jack Harlan stepped out from the crowd, tall and unflinching, his voice cutting through the wind like a blade. Every head turned. Kane's smile faltered for the briefest moment. Jack walked slowly toward the platform, eyes locked on the man who had ruined so many lives. "I've ridden with the law before," Jack said clearly so the whole square could hear. "And I know what real justice looks like. This isn't it." He nodded toward the edge of the crowd. Silas stepped forward, old legs shaking, but his voice held surprising strength as he held up the worn notebook. "I saw you shoot Thomas Hayes in the back," Silas called out. "I wrote it down that same night. Every name, every dollar you stole, every man you buried to feed your greed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kane's face twisted with rage. "Arrest them!" he shouted to his men. "They're liars and traitors." One of the gunmen drew fast. But before he could fire, a small figure darted forward. Tommy Reed, only 12 years old, threw himself in front of Jack, arms spread wide, voice cracking with fear and courage. "Don't you touch him," the boy cried. "He saved us. He's a good man." The gunmen hesitated. The entire square fell deathly silent as they watched a frightened orphan child stand ready to take a bullet for a stranger who had become family. Clara stepped forward then. She walked past Jack and Tommy with steady, measured steps until she stood directly before Victor Kane. No tears fell. Her voice rang out calm and powerful, carrying across the dusty square. "I loved my husband," she said. "He died trying to protect our home, our future. You took him from me. You took our land. You turned this town against me with your lies. But you will not take my son, and you will not take the truth any longer." Her words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shame and awakening moved through the crowd. Men who had looked away for years now lowered their eyes. Women who had whispered rumors began to nod slowly. Marshal Elias Crow raised his badge high. "Victor Kane," he declared, voice strong. "At last, you are under arrest for murder, theft, and corruption." Kane lunged for a hidden pistol, but Jack was faster. With one clean motion, he disarmed the man and forced him to his knees. The hired guns, seeing the tide turn and the townspeople beginning to close in with angry murmurs, slowly backed away and dropped their weapons. As the red dust swirled around them, Victor Kane was led away in chains. Later that afternoon, under the same burning sky, deeds were returned to their rightful owners. Whispers of justice spread through Dust Hollow like fresh water in the desert. Jack stood beside Clara at the edge of the square. He placed a gentle, steady hand on her shoulder. She leaned into the touch, exhausted but free for the first time in months. Tommy stood between them, small but straight-backed, looking out toward the endless red horizon. Silas watched from a distance, the notebook finally handed over to the marshal. A lifetime of silence had ended. The wind picked up, blowing the red dust high into the air, as if the desert itself was breathing again. Clara looked at Jack, then down at Tommy, and finally toward the wide-open land that no longer felt like a prison. This desert had tried to bury them. Instead, it had become the foundation for something new. A family born not of blood, but of courage. And as the four of them stood together, watching the sun paint the sky in gold and crimson, they understood the hardest truth of the frontier: justice is never given. It is taken back. By ordinary people brave enough to stand up together, armed with nothing more than an old notebook, a few bullets, and the unbreakable decision to believe in one another. This is a story about how even the smallest voices, when raised together, can shake the strongest tyrants, and how hope can bloom again where only red dust once ruled. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.